Hello, friends. Tonight's story follows Reva, an orc woman who always leaves before it gets too good. Fen, a frontier mill owner who says the true thing only once. And Bly, the 8-year-old who sent the letter her father burned. At a timber mill at the edge of everything, one kept list, one borrowed blanket, and one badly spelled letter began turning stubborn into something that looks a lot like home. Reva reached Aldric Mill in the hour when honest people were either finishing their work or pretending they were, which made it a useful hour for judging a place. At first, she did not knock. She stood where the wagon road widened into packed mud and mill dust, one hand hooked through the strap of her bag, and let the property tell on itself. The sawhouse leaned a little toward the creek, but not enough to be dangerous. The water wheel had lost 3 outer boards and had been patched with 2 different kinds of timber, which meant the owner had either no money or no patience for matching wood, possibly both. The log yard was full, but not orderly. Good spruce on the west side, soft pine too close to the mud, 2 oak trunks left where the sun would split the ends if nobody turned them by morning. A careless place would have let the chain drag in grit. This place had hung it on pegs. Undermanned then, not ruined. Just carrying too much with too few hands, which was a condition Reva understood better than she cared to. She could hear the saw before she saw the man. The blade's high, steady complaint moved through the open side of the shed, and under it came the heavier sounds. Timber shifted by pry, boot heels on plank, a low voice counting under breath. She stepped closer, making no attempt to hide herself. At 6'2", with bright green skin and shoulders made narrow by travel rather than broad by vanity, hiding had always required more theater than she had patience for. Better to arrive as a fact. People hated facts, but they usually recovered faster than they recovered from surprises. She stopped outside the sawhouse and waited until the man inside eased the last board through and pulled the lever that killed the belt. He did not turn at once. He laid his palm flat on the cut board, checking tremor or grain or both, then looked over his shoulder as if he had known the exact spot where she stood. "You Aldric?" she asked. "Fen Aldric." He came down the plank steps without wiping his hands first, which meant either he was not particular or he knew mill dust was not something a person defeated by ceremony. He was shorter than she was by a head and part of a neck, brown hair pushed back in a way that had started the morning as intention and ended as habit. His beard was kept close, not fashionable, just considered. Hazel eyes, green at the rim where the low light caught them. "You're looking for work." "Offering it." "That sounds more expensive." "Usually means I know what I'm worth." The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, a note taken. "What work?" "Timber assessment, chain operation, basic mechanics if the trouble is honest. Hauling schedules, accounts if your books haven't been left out in the rain." "They haven't." "Good." Ink complains. He studied her hands instead of her tusks, which put him ahead of 2 towns and 1 ferry captain. Her right palm was rough from tool grip, the callus deep under the first knuckles. The left bore the old pale oath cut across the center, faded but not gone. Most people noticed the mark and then pretended they had not. Fen looked, understood it was not part of the negotiation, and lifted his gaze back to her face. "Name?" "Reva." "Plan?" "None that matters to your mill." "Didn't ask for the mill." "No clan," she said. The words came out flat from long use, worn smooth like a coin. 4 years since the land grants moved north without asking who lived on them." He nodded once, not apology, not pity. Pity made people sloppy. This was only acknowledgement, and therefore bearable. "Pay is 8 silver a week plus board if you're as useful as you say. 6 if you're half as useful. No drink in the sawhouse. No fighting in the yard unless the other person deserves it and my daughter isn't watching. That last rule has room in it. Most useful rules do. Board where? Barn loft. It's dry. Cot's better than the floor. There's a stovepipe along the south wall and mice who believe in territorial rights. I have negotiated with worse landlords. Start tomorrow? Start now, if you want that oak turned before morning. Fen looked toward the yard. The oak was exactly where she had filed it, end grain to the sun, heavy enough to need 2 grown men or one person willing to be intelligent with a roller. He looked back at her, and this time the movement of his mouth was a smile, small and real, and gone before it made any claim. You eat first? I work better when nobody owes me supper yet. Then we'll turn the oak. That was how she took employment at Aldric Mill. No begging, no story softened at the edges, no grateful lowering of the eyes. By dusk, she had helped roll both oak trunks under shade, reset a loose guide on the feed table, and learned that Fen Aldric did not waste words in the presence of work. He gave a direction once. If she had already moved, he stopped giving it. If he saw a better method, he used it without performing surprise that an orc woman had thought of it first. Twice, she caught him watching the way she assessed a log by sound, tapping along the bark with the back of a hook. Not suspicion. Interest. There was a difference, and Reva had survived this long partly by never mistaking one for the other. The barn loft was exactly what he had promised, which was rarer than it should have been. Dry boards, a cot with a wool blanket folded at one end, a peg for her coat, a narrow shelf under the eaves, and a square of window looking toward the creek. She set her bag on the floor and did not unpack. She took out only the necessary things: bedroll, knife, spare shirt, the tin with her needle and thread, the small ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Everything else stayed where a hand could find it in darkness. She checked the ladder, the loft door, the gap in the boards near the rear wall that could be widened with a boot if fire came up from below. Good. 3 exits, if a person had a generous definition of exit and no sentimental attachment to ankles. Fen brought supper in a covered pan and left it on the ladder landing. Beans with salt pork, cornbread, coffee gone bitter from sitting too long. Reva ate sitting on the floor with her back against the wall facing the door. Below, the barn animals shifted and huffed. Beyond them, the mill settled into evening clicks and cooling sighs. She had slept in freight sheds, under wagons, in a ditch once during a rain that made every decision in her life look suspect. This was better than most. That was not the same as safe. Safe was a word people used when they had forgotten how fast weather changed. In the morning, she woke before the household and found a child standing at the bottom of the ladder with a stick in one hand and a biscuit in the other. The child's hair had been dragged into 2 plaits of unequal confidence, one tied with blue string and one with what looked like a strip of flour sack. She was small, dark-eyed, solemn with the seriousness of a person conducting official inspection. "You're the orc," the child said. "Recent evidence supports that." "I'm Bly." "Recent evidence is less clear there, but I'll accept it." Bly considered this, then took a bite of biscuit. "Papa said not to bother you before breakfast." "Is this after breakfast?" "This is during breakfast. That is legally different." "I see your household values precision." "Papa does. I value knowing things." Bly craned her neck to look up into the loft. "Do you have bones in your bag?" "Not today." "Did you yesterday?" "Not ones I was emotionally attached to." The child nodded, as if this was a satisfactory professional answer. "Papa said you know chains." "I know several chains, some better than others." "The East drags sticks if you take a wet pine from the far pile. Papa says it's because the lower tooth is worn. I think it's because the peg is not set square." Your papa know you diagnose mill equipment at breakfast? He says I'm not allowed within 10 feet of the east drag. That wasn't the question. No. Reva came down the ladder, ducking beneath the low beam. Bly did not step back. Most adults stepped back. Children either ran or stared. This one stood close enough to be kicked if Reva were clumsy, which Reva was not, and looked at her with an expression that had not yet learned to turn curiosity into fear for politeness' sake. "Show me the peg," Reva said. Bly's face opened into triumph. "I knew it!" "Know it quietly. I haven't had coffee." The peg was not square. The lower tooth was also worn. This was how most arguments worked when stripped of pride. Everybody partly right and the machinery still broken. Reva reset the peg after breakfast while Fen watched from the sawhouse door, arms folded, saying nothing. Bly stood exactly 10 feet away, having measured with heel-to-toe steps and then added a thumb's width in case of legal review. When the chain ran smoother, Bly looked at her father with eyebrows raised. Fen said, "Your victory is unbearable." "I will try to carry it responsibly," Bly said, and then looked at Reva. "Do orcs eat apples?" "Only the rude ones." Bly ran toward the house to test the orchard against this new category. The work took shape around Reva faster than any of them named. By the third day, she knew which logs had come down from the North Ridge by the tightness of their growth rings, which teamster exaggerated weight to hide poor harnessing, and which accounts in Fen's ledger had been written after midnight by the slant of the numbers. She graded timber in chalk marks, neat enough to shame the town clerk. She set chain without making a performance of strength. Men who came to collect boards slowed when they saw her, and then either remembered manners or mislaid them completely. Reva preferred the second kind. They announced themselves early and required less watching. One teamster with a red scarf and a mouth arranged for trouble said, "Aldric hiring war stock now?" Reva had a cant hook in her hands and 3 answers ready, 2 of them expensive. Fen spoke without looking up from the invoice. "No, skilled labor. You'll know the difference when you meet, either." The teamster laughed because he did not understand until later, which was the safest time for such men to understand. Reva kept working. She did not thank Fen. He did not look for thanks. That made it easier to stay through the afternoon. She learned the mill's habits by looking instead of asking. Asking made a debt, and debts had hooks no ledger ever showed honestly. The grade stamps, for instance, were not where any sensible mill kept them. She needed them on the 4th day when Fen was out back arguing with a mule and a load of cedar had to be marked before the buyer arrived. She could have asked. The words were not complicated. "Where are your grade stamps?" Children managed harder sentences while missing teeth. Instead, she went through the sawhouse with purposeful slowness, noting clean rectangles in dust, oil marks, the paths of Fen's hands. People put tools where their bodies believed in them. The stamps were in a lidded flour tin beneath the narrow bench near the sharpening wheel, wrapped in rag and ordered by size. She had just closed the tin when Fen returned. "You found them," he said. "They were hiding poorly." "They were in a flour tin under a bench." "Exactly. Amateur work." He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, hair loosened by the wind. "You could have asked." "I could also have juggled the saw blades. We are all spared by my restraint." His gaze lingered on her face, not pushing, only marking the shape of the deflection. "Bly can show you where things are. She knows every drawer I don't want her in." "I noticed the child has governmental reach." "She gets it from her mother." That was the first time he mentioned the dead wife. He did not lower his voice around the fact. He set it down in the room like a tool that belonged there, worn and still useful. Reva looked at the grade stamp in her hand, then set it on the bench with the others. "Useful inheritance?" "Yes," he said, and went back to work. Bly entered Reva's days with the confidence of weather. She appeared on fence rails, on sacks of shavings, in doorways, always holding something she had been told not to bring near moving machinery. A rock with a stripe, a dead beetle, a length of chain she claimed was not the mill chain, only chain adjacent. Reva corrected her knots, showed her how to read rot in a stump, and once spent half an hour explaining why a person did not stand downhill from stacked timber unless they wanted their obituary to include the phrase, preventable stupidity. "Were you always this cheerful?" Bly asked. "I was worse as a baby. My first word was probably liability." "What does that mean?" "Something expensive, pretending not to be dangerous." "Papa says the boiler is a liability." "Your papa and I may yet form a church." Fen overheard that from the yard and said, "Services at dawn, sermons under 4 minutes." "I require better music," Reva said. Bly plays spoon on bucket. "I withdraw my complaint." It became a rhythm before Reva had the sense to mistrust it. Morning coffee on the porch step because the house kitchen was Fen's territory and she respected territories until invited. Work in the yard until the sun rose high. Bly's lessons at the crate table under the awning, half sums and spelling, half questions nobody with social training would ask. Fen moving between mill and ledger and child with the steady exhaustion of a man who had learned not to count how many hands he was missing. Reva fixing things quietly because broken things spoke too loudly. The south gate hinge stopped screaming on the 7th day because she pulled the pin, cleaned it, packed it with grease, and reset it before anyone came out for breakfast. The cracked handle on the flour bin was replaced with a shaped scrap of maple 2 days later. A loose board on the porch step stopped dipping under Bly's foot. The wash line gained a second peg. None of these acts required announcement. In Reva's experience, announced kindness became a leash. Unannounced repair could pass as weather. Fen noticed anyway. He started a list on the inside cover of the ledger because, of course he did. She saw it by accident after the 2nd week when she was checking tallies and he left the book open beside the coffee pot. Gate hinge, flower handle, porch board, wash peg, small nail by loft ladder. He had written each item in his plain hand, no comment beside them. The list made her want to laugh and leave in equal measure. "You keeping accounts on ghosts now?" she asked. "On repairs. I charge extra for being documented. I pay in coffee." "Then your debt is worse than I thought." Bly, who had been drawing a mule with too many legs at the table, said, "Papa writes down things he doesn't know how to say yet." The kitchen went still by one small degree. Fen looked at his daughter. "Do I?" "Yes. You write them, and then you look at them when you think nobody sees. That is what writing is for." Reva kept her eyes on the ledger. Children were knives with jam on the handle. Nobody respected the edge until already cut. Fen reached across and tapped Bly's paper. "That mule has 6 legs. It's running fast." "Then I apologize to the mule." Reva closed the ledger after the accounts balanced, and for the rest of the day the list sat in her mind like a coal under ash. The window latch revealed itself at the end of the 1st week. Bly's room was on the east side of the house, a small square room with a bed under the sloped ceiling, books stacked in reckless towers, and a windowsill crowded with stones, feathers, and one bird skull clean enough to suggest boiling. Reva went up because Bly had announced that her copy of the field manual contained an error regarding riverbank clay, and would Reva please confirm before Bly wrote a correction to the publisher. The window was open 2 inches, though the air had teeth in it. Its latch hung misaligned, one screw missing, the catch worn bright from years of almost closing. Reva saw the broken thing and reached for it before thought could dress itself. Then she stopped. Some broken things asked for tools. Some warned a person off. This one had dust in the groove around it, but no dust on the sill, which meant the room was cleaned and the latch deliberately ignored, maintained in its brokenness. She let her hand fall. "Cold in here," she said. "I like hearing the creak." "Mama said she was going to fix that latch," Bly said, turning pages with a pencil in her mouth. "Then she had me instead. Not as useful for windows." Reva looked at the child's uneven plates, at the bent latch, at the field manual open to a diagram of soil layers. "Debatable. Windows rarely correct publishers." Bly grinned around the pencil. "That's true." Fen appeared in the doorway a moment later with a folded blanket. He looked at the open window, then at Reva, and she knew he had seen the brief reach of her hand because men who survived Mills noticed motion before meaning. He said nothing. He set the blanket on the bed. "No boiling skulls in your room after supper." It was one time. It was a memorable time. Reva stepped away from the window and did not fix it. Weeks built themselves without permission. The first rain came hard from the west and turned the yard to black paste. Reva and Fen worked shoulder to shoulder beneath the sawhouse roof, sorting warped planks, their sleeves dark, breath visible, hands moving in a rhythm that had no need for charm. He knew now that she wanted the hook before she put her hand out. She knew when he would step back from the feed table by the shift of his weight. Once the space narrowed and her shoulder brushed his chest as she turned with a board. He did not move away quickly. Neither did she. The board was heavy. That was the official report filed by all parties. Bly sat on an upturned crate beyond the spray of rain, reading aloud from the field manual in a tone of profound judgment. "It says here a proper timber crew requires 4 grown persons." "Books are sentimental," Reva said. "Are you two a proper timber crew?" "No. We are an argument with payroll." Fen slid a plank onto the stack. "An efficient argument." "That's worse," Bly said. "Efficient arguments finish before I can pick a side." "You pick sides?" Fen asked. "Always Reva's. She knows about skulls." "I see." "Don't look wounded," Reva said. "Raise a more loyal child next time." He gave her that small sideways look that had started appearing when she pleased him, and he refused to make an event of it. "I'll put it in the accounts." In the barn one evening, Bly brought the field manuals up to Reva's loft because, as she explained, the house table was compromised by soup and Fen's refusal to let her spread 3 maps over supper. Reva should have sent her down. Instead, she lit the lantern, cleared space on a crate, and let the child climb onto the cot with a pencil behind one ear. Rain stitched the roof. The barn smelled of damp wool, hay, and the faint iron tang of tools. Bly lay on her stomach, boots kicking slowly in the air, while Reva showed her how to mark a trail that doubled back without confusing the return route. "You make your 4s like Papa," Bly said. "That an accusation?" "Observation. His lean left, too. Maybe all intelligent 4s lean left. Mine don't. Then we have found the limit of your gifts." Bly looked pleased by this for reasons unclear to any adult nation. Later, when Fen climbed the ladder with 2 mugs of coffee and a cup of watered cider, he paused at the sight of them. Reva had one manual across her knees. Bly had fallen asleep with her cheek on a map, one hand resting over the drawn line of a river. Fen stood there in the lamplight with his hair damp at the temples, and something passed over his face that Reva pretended not to see because it was private and because it made the loft smaller. "She invaded," Reva said. "She does. I have a strict policy against sleeping cartographers." "She violates policies." He set the cider down, though Bly no longer needed it. He did not immediately lift her. Instead, he sat on the top step of the ladder, one boot on the rung below, mug in hand. He sat as if sitting were all he had come to do. The rain made a room around them. Reva should have resented the ease of it. A man in her doorway, a child asleep beside her, coffee offered without debt, silence not requiring defense. Dangerous materials, all of them. No warning labels. After a while, Fen said, "You ever work the northern cedar routes?"
Before the grants changed.
That where you learned accounts?
No, I learned accounts from being poor. Cedar just taught me how men lie when they think the other person can't divide. His mouth moved against the mug.
Useful education.
Expensive school. He accepted that and did not ask the next question. The unasked question sat between them with its boots muddy.
What happened to your clan?
People love to ask what happened, as if disaster were a traveling show and Reva had tickets. Fen drank coffee and left the question where it lay. That was worse, in its way. Better manners gave a person fewer excuses. Bly woke when he lifted her, muttering,
"The river marker goes above the bend."
"I'll alert the governor," Fen said. "She can sleep here," Reva said, too quickly because the child's head had rolled against Fen's shoulder and because the sight had reached into some unguarded cupboard in her chest. Fen looked at her over Bly's hair.
"She kicks."
"I've survived meals."
"She argues in her sleep."
"Then at least one of us will be conscious."
Bly's eyes cracked open. "I do not."
"You do," Fen and Reva said together. Bly smiled without fully waking. Fen carried her down. Reva sat very still after they left, hands wrapped around the coffee mug, listening to the ladder creak under his weight and then to the house door opening through rain. She did not unpack that night. She did take the spare shirt from her bag and set it on the shelf, only because it was damp, only because cloth mildewed. A practical act. The sort of lie that did not even respect itself. The oath cut came up because Bly noticed everything and respected almost nothing as private until taught. Reva was mending a torn harness strap outside the barn, the awl moving clean through leather, when Bly dropped beside her with a jar of beetles she had been instructed to release elsewhere. "Who cut your hand?" Reva's left palm tightened around the strap. The pale line across it had not hurt in years, which did not stop it from speaking when stared at. "I did." "On purpose?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was young and dramatic and surrounded by other young, dramatic people with knives." Bly leaned closer, dark eyes narrowed. "That is not a real answer. It is more real than you deserve for free." "I have beetles." "Not legal tender." Bly considered the jar. 3 beetles and a blue button." Reva pushed the awl through and drew the thread tight. The truth stood nearby, plain as a post. She had no reason to lift it. She lifted it anyway, maybe because children did not know how to paw at a wound for pleasure. "It was an oath cut. When my clan still held land together, we marked promise with blood. Not all promises, large ones, the kind that were supposed to outlive weather." "What did you promise?" "To stay with my people." Bly's face changed not toward pity, which would have ended the conversation, but toward concentration. "But your people had to leave." "Yes." "Did the promise break?" Reva looked down at the scar, the old white line sitting across green skin like a road on a map nobody used. "No. The place to keep it did." Bly sat with that, turning it over in the serious machinery of herself. Then she unscrewed the jar and let the beetles crawl into the grass one by one. "That seems like a mean thing for a promise to do." Reva laughed once, low and surprised. "You have no idea." Fen had been by the chopping block, splitting kindling with steady blows. He did not look over. Reva knew he had heard. The yard had that quality after certain truths. Same boards, same mud, same air, every object pretending nothing had altered. Fen set the axe aside and gathered the kindling. When he passed her, he put one split piece on the bench beside the harness strap. "For the stovepipe," he said. "Loft runs cold tonight." That was all. No softened voice, no careful face. A piece of wood for a cold room. Reva's throat tried something foolish. She made it stop. The warning system began in the 4th week, faint as a mouse in the wall. Reva had built it over years and trusted it because it had kept her unclaimed and therefore unrobbed. It woke when a merchant in town greeted her by name without first checking whether he should. It woke when Bly saved the heel of the bread for her because Reva liked it tough. It woke when Fen shifted the work schedule around her bad shoulder after she strained it, without mentioning that he had noticed. Permanence had edges. You could bruise yourself on them before you saw the shape. She began taking small jobs in town on rest evenings. A broken pump handle behind the cooper's shed, a wagon brake for a woman who paid in coin and onions, an inventory dispute at the general store settled by arithmetic and the implied threat of Reva's eyebrows. The jobs were practical. The jobs also placed coin in 3 different pockets and reminded the town she was not bound to Aldric Mill. A person with options could leave cleanly. A person with only one place to go had already made a mistake. Fen noticed. Of course he noticed. He said nothing for 3 days. On the 4th, when she returned after dusk with onion skins in her bag and grease on her sleeve, he was on the porch, sharpening a draw knife. Bly slept inside. The lamp in her room glowed behind the thin curtain, the broken latch keeping the window cracked as always. "Cooper's pump?" he asked. "Wagon brake." "Ah." That was almost a question. "Wasn't." "Good. I'd hate to see you strain yourself." He drew the blade along the stone, slow. "Town paying fare?" "Fair enough." "Good." The word should have been plain. It was plain. Reva still wanted to pick it up and inspect it for hidden barbs. Good, because he respected work. Good, because he did not own her time. Good, because he had no intention of giving her the argument that would make leaving easier. Inconsiderate man. The 5th week brought heat. The yard baked, resin rose sharp from fresh cuts, and tempers in town swelled like bad boards. Reva found the missing penny in the flour account after watching Fen recalculate twice and frown at the same column with increasing offense. "You carry the 3 like it insulted your mother," she said. "It did." "The missing penny is in the salt line. You copied a 9 like a 7 because your lamp smokes." He looked at the ledger, then at her. "How long have you known?" "Since breakfast." "You waited until supper to say?" "I wanted to see if the penny would reveal itself voluntarily." "Proud penny." "Runs in the household." Bly, mouthful of beans, said, "Reva doesn't ask where things are. She waits until we betray our systems." Fen looked at Reva over the ledger. "Does she?" "I ask plenty of things." "You asked me yesterday whether the mayor's face always looks like uncooked dough." "That was civic inquiry." "You asked me if mule ownership creates despair or merely reveals it." "Philosophical inquiry." "You didn't ask where I keep the spare mill teeth." "I found them." Bly pointed her spoon in vindication. Betrayal of systems. Reva stood to refill the coffee because sitting had become strategically unsound. Fen let her go, but not before his gaze touched the back of her hand, the angle of her shoulders, the bag still kept ready beneath the barn loft shelf. There were men who looked at a woman to measure possession. Fen looked as if he were reading weather he could not stop. The evening that tipped it came quietly, because life had a cruel fondness for small hinges. There was no storm, no danger, no word spoken too plainly at first. Only supper late after a long day, the 3 of them in the kitchen because rain threatened but never arrived. Bly had spilled flour on her dress, trying to help with biscuits.
Fen had burned one finger on the pan and accepted no sympathy beyond sticking it in his mouth with dignity. Reva had taken the kettle from the stove without thinking, and Fen had moved behind her to reach the cups, his hand briefly settling at the counter beside her hip. Not touching. Near. Warmth gathered in the space between their bodies and did not apologize. Bly looked from one to the other with the unbearable clear eye of 8 years and said, "If Reva lived in the house, she would not have to come in from the barn when it rains." The kettle lid rattled once under Reva's hand. Fen said, "Bly?" "What? The loft is good for mice and fugitives. Reva is only one of those." "Which one?" Reva asked, because humor was a door, and she needed one. Bly squinted at her. "You have mouse opinions, but fugitive bag habits." Fen set the cups down. His eyes were on the table, then on Reva's bag visible through the open mudroom door where she had left it after town. Too visible, accusingly shaped. "Eat your biscuit," he said. "I am eating and observing. I can do 2 things." "Observe quieter." Bly obeyed for almost 12 seconds. Supper continued. Fen asked Reva whether the North Ridge cedar would hold until winter. Reva answered. Bly told a story about a frog found in the wash bucket. The lamp hissed. Rain finally began, soft at first, then steady on the roof. Nothing happened. That was the problem. Nothing happened, and the kitchen became an ordinary room where a child leaned against Reva's side to show her a drawing, where Fen reached to wipe flour from Bly's chin with his thumb, where Reva knew which cup was hers because it had been placed by her hand before she asked. No trap sprang. No demand appeared. The belongings simply stood there, complete enough to cast a shadow. Later, in the loft, Reva packed the left boot first, which she always did, a habit from a year of sleeping in wagon beds where a person might need to run with only one boot and a knife. She packed the ledger, the spare shirt from the shelf, the tin of needles, the small roll of tools. She left nothing loose. Leaving during the good part required discipline. It was like pulling a clean tooth because waiting meant infection. She was tightening the strap when Fen's voice came from below. "Reva." She closed her eyes. Then she opened them because closed eyes belong to people asking mercy of the dark. "You climb quieter than you look." "I'm at the bottom of the ladder." "Then I insulted you for free." He came up only far enough to stand with his shoulders level with the loft floor, giving her the room, not entering. The lantern lit half his face. His beard had silver hidden in it when the light angled right. She hated noticing that. She hated the word hidden, too. It made noticing intimate. "Town job?" he asked. "Eastern settlement needs a chain hand. 2 weeks, maybe more." "You weren't going to mention it until morning." "I'm mentioning it now through the elegant method of being discovered." He looked at the bag, not at her first. The bag was the honest witness. "Bly will ask why." "Tell her work." "She'll know that's not all of it." "Then tell her I'm fond of disappointing children. It will give her something to correct in a future publisher's note." His jaw shifted. Still, no anger. Anger would have helped. She could have used anger like a rail to walk out straight. He gave her none. "You're too proud to ask and too stubborn to stay." The words landed so cleanly there was no bruise at first. Reva stood with the strap in one hand, the pale oath cut across her palm showing where the leather had pulled her fingers open. "That sounds like 2 accusations charging rent as one." "It's one observation." "Your daughter gets it from you." "Yes." She looked toward the loft window, the square of black beyond it, rain cutting lines through lamplight. "You have it exactly right." "No," Fen said. That brought her gaze back. "I have what I can see." A worse answer, a kinder one. She put the strap through its buckle. Don't ask me to stay. I wasn't going to. There it was. The frontier had no patience for euphemism, and neither did he. He would not chase. He would not bargain with a door. He had said the true thing once and left it standing between them where she had to step around it to go. Good, she said. It isn't. No. He held the ladder rail, knuckles pale under saw scratches. I'll tell Bly you took work east. That's true. Not all of it. No. He nodded once. Safe road, Reva. She almost laughed at the size of that mercy. He gave her the road, not forgiveness. Forgiveness presumed injury claimed aloud. Safe road was what you said to a traveler when you refused to make a cage out of wanting otherwise. Mind the oak pile, she said, because a person had to leave something ordinary behind, or she might leave blood instead. Third stack's leaning. I know. Of course you do. He climbed down. She waited until his steps crossed the barn and the door closed below. Then she sat on the cot for exactly 1 minute by the count of her own breath. After that, she finished packing. She left before morning. The rain had washed the yard clean enough to lie about yesterday's tracks. Reva walked past the house without looking at Bly's window, which meant she looked at it with the whole surface of her skin. The latch held the window open 2 inches. A pale curtain moved. No child stood there. Good. Better. Necessary. She took the eastern road with her bag settled properly on her shoulder and the mill shrinking behind the trees. Functional, undermanned, carrying too much with too few hands. None of her concern. She repeated that until repetition became noise. The eastern settlement paid 7 silver and fed its workers stew thick enough to repair masonry. The chain was inferior, the foreman loud, the logs mostly pine and therefore boring. Reva did the work well because work did not deserve punishment for the failures of the heart, a phrase she would have mocked in anyone else and therefore did not permit herself to say. She slept in a bunkhouse with 6 other workers and faced the door. She did not dream of the mill. She woke with the sound of Phantom Creek water in her ears and refused to assign meaning. On the second morning, she corrected a tally error before the foreman lost a shipment. On the third, she reset a pulley without being asked, and then regretted the quiet repair because it was a habit from another place. In the evenings, she took her cup outside, where the settlement road ran east to freight country and west to things not named. The pay was adequate, the food was adequate, the work was clean enough. Nothing was wrong. Nothing being wrong had always been the best time to leave, and yet she had already left, so the old pattern had nowhere to spend itself. It prowled inside her and scratched at doors. A letter found her on the 4th day by the usual frontier miracle. 3 riders, 1 storekeeper, a boy paid in candy, and her own name pronounced 4 different ways before landing close enough. The envelope was made from ledger paper folded twice. On the outside, in large, determined letters, it read, Reva at the East Chain Place. That narrowed the world more effectively than most official addresses. The handwriting inside staggered across the page with fierce purpose. Dear Reva, I am not asking you to come back, so do not get proud about it. Papa says work is work and people go where work is. I know that. Aunt Dara came on Tuesday, but it was really Wednesday because the clock was slow after the rain. She is Mama's sister and wears gloves even inside, which seems untrusty. She says Papa cannot raise me proper alone on the frontier, and she has filed papers in town for family court. She says I should live in the city, where there are schools and no saw blades. I said saw blades are not allowed in the house except the little cracked one Papa uses for scraping, and she did not think that was funny. Papa told her I am not going. She said the court will decide stable house.
I read the rule book from Mr. Venn because he leaves it under the counter where tall people do not look. It says stable house can mean registered household workers and continuing care and accounts and school. You were registered when you were here, but Mr. Venn says you are not now because you left for other work and Papa did not say you would return. Papa did not write you. I know because he wrote 3 letters and burned them in the stove, which is bad paper use. He says I cannot ask you to come back because that is not fair to you. He did not say I could not write a letter.
Those are different things. I am doing my sums. The east dragged sticks again, but only a little. The oak pile fell, but not on anybody because Papa moved it after you said. I fed the mice in your loft by accident because I left biscuit there. If you do not come back, I will understand, because Papa says understanding is not the same as liking, and I am practicing. From Bly Aldric. P.S. Aunt Dara says orcs are not suitable in a child's household. I told her suitable is for boots and jars. She looked like the mayor's dough face. Reva read the letter once, standing outside the bunkhouse. Then she sat on the chopping block and read it again. The settlement moved around her, all wheel noise and men shouting over ordinary inconveniences. A woman laughed by the cook shed. Someone dropped a crate. The world had a vulgar talent for continuing. She folded the letter along the same creases Bly had made, then opened it and read the line about Fen burning 3 letters. Bad paper use. Yes, that sounded like Bly. That sounded like Fen, too, writing the wrong request for the wrong reason and destroying it rather than make a hook of need. Reva had believed leaving was neutral because she had designed it to be. No promises spoken, no hands held, no bed warmed, no claim allowed to grow teeth. She had left only herself behind, and herself was portable. The letter disagreed in terrible spelling. She worked the rest of the day because the body, when ordered firmly, could still be useful while the mind made a ruin of itself. She moved pine. She checked chain. She accepted stew. She lay in the bunk after dark with Bly's letter under her folded coat and stared at the rafters until the breathing around her turned heavy. Make yourself sleep on it, she told herself. A person should not turn around for one letter, one child, one man who had named too much and asked nothing. A person should not build her life by reflex in either direction. Leaving without thought was cowardice dressed as survival. Returning without thought could be the same costume in better light. She did not sleep. Near dawn, she sat up and packed properly, not the old 5-minute sweep of a person escaping a roof before it learned her name. She folded the spare shirt. She wrapped the ledger in oilcloth. She cleaned her knife before she sheathed it. She paid back the unused portion of board to a foreman too sleepy to argue and collected the wages due for 4 days. The eastern road was blue with morning when she started west. She stopped once on the ridge where the pines opened and Aldric Mill lay below, the wheel turning slow in the creek. Smoke rose from the house chimney. The yard looked smaller from above and more fragile, a child's arrangement of boards and roofs and stubbornness set against too much country. Reva stood with Bly's letter in her coat and waited for the old warning system to announce danger. It did. Of course it did. It rang every bell it had. Belonging ahead, turn back, teeth in the walls, loss already sharpening its knife. She listened with the respect due any alarm that had once saved her life. Then she walked down the hill anyway. Fen was in the sawhouse when she returned because the world had a sense of structure even when people did not. He stood at the feed table with both hands on a plank, looking thinner than 6 days had any right to make him. Bly was not in the yard, no sign of gloves inside or out. Reva set her bag beside the door where he could see it but not trip on it.
The East Settlement overpays for boredom, she said. Fen shut off the belt. The saw slowed, its complaint lowering into silence. He looked at her face first, not the bag. Does it? I quit before boredom became a moral condition. Prudent? I need to register at the township office before noon if Ven still takes lunch at noon. He takes it at 11:40 because he distrusts expectations. Still hiding law books under the counter? Bly found them, so not well. A little air moved between them that might have been laughter if either had been reckless enough to finish it. Fen wiped his hands on a rag. She wrote you. She did. I told her not to ask. She explained the distinction. She would. Reva touched the folded letter inside her coat but did not take it out. I'm not back because you asked. I know. I'm not back for your legal standing. I know. That answer annoyed her because it was true and because he had no right to make room so accurately. You could pretend to misunderstand. It would give me something to correct. I'm not in a generous mood. No, I can see that. His eyes held on hers, hazel gone green in the sawhouse light. The unspoken thing stood there, not softer for being unspoken. She had come back for Bly. She had come back because Fen did not ask.
She had come back because the mill yard had continued inside her after she left. Chain and rain and burned letters and a child practicing understanding. None of these were complete explanations. All of them were true enough to work with. Bly is at Ven's with Mrs. Calder, Fen said. Dara wanted to speak with the clerk without her present. Dara sounds optimistic. She has gloves. I was warned. Fen's mouth moved, worn and brief. Reva. Yes. Safe road back. The words were the same as before and not the same at all. She picked up her bag. Mind the east drag. Your lower tooth is worn. Peg's crooked too. Bly will be unbearable. She has been. Good, Reva said, and went to register. The township office sat between the general store and a room claiming to be a bank by virtue of having a safe and anxiety. Mr. Ven was a narrow man with spectacles, ink on his cuff, and the expression of someone who had been born disappointed by filing systems. He looked up when Reva entered, looked down at the open registry, and then looked up again with the faint relief of a man seeing a column complete itself. Reva, he said. Aldric household? If the post is open. It was never formally closed. I left. Workers take outside contracts. I took my bag. Many workers have bags. You're being clerical at me. Someone must. He turned the registry toward her. Continuation of household employment, Aldric Mill, timber, and domestic support as previously entered. Sign and date. Domestic support? Legal term. Sounds like I dust shelves in an apron. Do you? I repair gates and prevent children from being flattened by timber. Stable households are built on less. She took the pen. Her signature looked too dark on the page, too much like a nail driven through a loose board. Reva, no clan, attached by ink to a household she had fled because a child had leaned against her side in a kitchen. Law had a cruel sense of humor. She signed anyway. Bly burst through the side door before the ink dried, Mrs. Calder behind her saying, "Walk, child," in the resigned tone of a person addressing floodwater. Bly stopped 3 feet from Reva. For the first time since they had met, the child looked uncertain. You came back, Bly said. I had complaints about your spelling. Bly's face did something complicated and brave, and then failed completely. She ran into Reva hard enough to drive a smaller person back a step. Reva stood with both hands lifted, caught between all her old rules and the child's arms around her waist. Mrs. Calder looked away. Mr. Ven developed urgent interest in the inkstand.
Reva lowered one hand to Bly's back, then the other. "You were not supposed to ask," Reva said into Bly's hair. "I didn't." Terrible spelling, though. "I was under legal pressure, so I gather."
Bly's grip tightened once and then released, because she was Fenn's daughter as well as her own person, and had apparently inherited the household curse of not holding too long when someone might run. Reva hated that most of all. Dara Holst entered from the inner room wearing gray gloves despite the June heat. She was tall for a human woman, though not close to Reva, with Fenn's late wife's dark eyes set in a face arranged by discipline. She took in the scene. Bly, near Reva's side, Ven's registry open, the pen still wet, Mrs. Calder pretending not to enjoy herself. Dara's gaze moved over Reva's green skin, close-cropped hair, work coat, boots, hands. It paused at the oath-cut scar and dismissed what it did not understand. "You are the worker," Dara said. "That is the polite noun available." "I am Dara Holst." "I read the letter." Dara looked at Bly. "You wrote to her." Bly lifted her chin. "I wrote a letter. Papa said I could not ask." Dara's mouth thinned. "This is exactly the sort of disorder I am concerned about." Reva looked around the office, labeled boxes, straight chairs, Ven's ruler aligned perfectly with the desk edge, the safe hunched in the corner like an iron toad. "You and I define disorder differently." "I doubt we define much the same." "That will save time." Ven cleared his throat with professional despair. "The preliminary family stability review is at 3. Since the Aldric household registry is now current, Miss Reva's documentation may be entered." "Miss Reva?" Dara asked. "Reva is sufficient," Reva said. Dara removed one glove, finger by finger. Her hands were pale, neat, unscarred in the way hands could be when other people did the difficult parts of living. "You understand this is a child's welfare matter, not a labor dispute." "I do." "And you believe your presence changes what is best for Bly?" "No," Reva said. "I believe evidence changes what the court can pretend not to see." Bly made a small, satisfied sound. Mrs. Calder coughed into her hand. Ven wrote something down, possibly because if he did not write, he would smile. The hearing took place in the back room of the meeting hall, where the territorial family court arrived once a month with a traveling magistrate, a clerk, and 2 boxes of forms. Fen sat at one table in his clean shirt, beard trimmed close, hair still too long but combed with evidence of effort. Bly sat beside him with both feet not quite reaching the floor, hands folded on a field manual she had been told not to bring and brought anyway. Reva sat behind them at first until Ven gestured her forward as a registered household worker. The chair at Fen's left scraped when she pulled it out. Fen did not look at her immediately. His hand rested on the table between them, saw scratches pale across the knuckles. Reva set her documentation beside it. Work contracts, route tallies, wage records, letters from mills that had employed her, and one from a cooper who owed her for saving his pump and had written as if held at knife point by grammar. Dara sat across the room with her lawyer, a young man too polished for frontier chairs. Her gloves lay folded on the table. She watched Bly often, Fen sometimes, and Reva with the recalculating attention of a person whose simple argument had acquired inconvenient dimensions. The magistrate was a broad woman named Hélène, with silver hair pinned flat and no patience stored anywhere visible. She read Dara's petition without expression. "You claim Mr. Aldric cannot provide a stable household due to frontier conditions, dangerous industry on premises, lack of appropriate supervision, and insufficient schooling." Dara inclined her head. "My niece is bright. She requires proper instruction, other children, and a household not built around saw machinery." Bly opened her mouth. Fen laid one finger on the field manual. Bly closed it, vibrating with unpublished commentary. Magistrate Eilen looked at Fen. "Your response."
Fen stood because the lawyer had stood, and because Fen, when unsure of a ceremony, matched the useful parts and ignored the rest. Bly is fed, taught, clothed, and not allowed near the saw. She reads above her age, argues above everybody's, and knows which parts of the mill can kill her because I've told her plainly. I have help in the household and business. I have accounts. I have neighbors who check when weather turns. Her aunt loves her, I don't dispute that, but Bly's home is not unstable because it has mud. The lawyer asked questions designed to make the mill sound like a beast crouched outside the kitchen door. Fen answered them until they dulled themselves. Yes, the saw was dangerous. No, Bly did not operate it. Yes, the creek flooded. No, the house was above the flood line. Yes, his wife had died. No, grief was not a legal argument unless the court intended to remove every child with a grave in the family. The young lawyer did not enjoy that answer. The magistrate did. Then Reva was called. She stood, aware of every eye deciding what to do with the size and color of her before her words arrived. This, too, was familiar weather. She gave her name, no clan, age 31, skilled timber worker, registered to the Aldric household as of 5 weeks prior with a 6-day outside contract that did not sever employment, according to Ven, who cited the rule with clerical relish. You left the household, the lawyer said. I took temporary work. With all your possessions? I travel with all my possessions. Poverty is efficient that way. A sound moved through the room and was strangled quickly. Magistrate Eileen's mouth remained flat. Answer only what is asked, Reva. Yes, magistrate. The lawyer adjusted his cuff. What duties do you perform? Timber grading, chain operation, mill maintenance, hauling schedules, accounts review, minor repair of household structures, safety supervision when Bly is in the yard, and occasional correction of field manual errors under protest. Bly whispered, Not under protest. Fen's finger touched the manual again. The lawyer glanced at Dara, then at the magistrate. You have no familial relation to the child? No. No long-term contract binding you to the household? No. No clan affiliation, no property in the territory, and no guarantee you will remain. Reva looked at Fen then. He was looking at the lawyer, not rescuing her, not pleading. Bly stared at Reva with open, painful trust. The question had teeth because it deserved them. No guarantee, Reva said. Only record. Record of what? Of staying where I am useful until work is done. And is your work in the Aldric household done? No. The room did not change. No music swelled. The clerk dipped his pen. Fen's breath left him silently enough that perhaps only Reva heard. Dara looked down at her folded gloves. Reva submitted 3 years of frontier work documentation because survival had made her a bookkeeper of herself. The magistrate examined them with more respect than surprise. You keep thorough accounts. I dislike starving by arithmetic error. Dara testified last. She spoke well. Reva could respect that even while opposing every conclusion. The city had schools, cousins, a room already prepared. Dara had means. Dara had loved her sister. She was not a villain, which made the matter more difficult and less convenient. She was a woman with grief arranged into certainty, and certainty could do harm without ever raising its voice. When Dara said, My sister would never have wanted her child raised among danger, Fen's face changed for one breath. Not anger, something older. Reva's hand moved beneath the table before permission and stopped just short of touching his sleeve. Fen saw. So did no one else. He answered when called. My wife built half that mill's accounts and knew every danger by name, he said. She wanted Bly raised by people who told the truth. Dara closed her eyes.
For the first time, her certainty showed a crack wide enough for memory to pass through. By late afternoon, after reviewing the registry and documentation, Eileen made her direction plain. Dara's petition was unlikely to succeed unless new evidence of neglect appeared. The full hearing would require time, money, and public testimony under oath. Dara withdrew before sunset. She did it in the meeting hall vestibule with her gloves back on and her lawyer already packing papers. "I will not drag Bly through a losing proceeding," she said to Fen. "Do not mistake that for agreement." "I won't," Fen said. Dara looked at Bly, who stood beside Reva and had not moved closer to her aunt, though she had been given the chance. "You may write to me." Bly nodded.
"Will you write back about the city schools?"
"If you wish." "I wish information, not recruitment." Dara's mouth tightened, then softened by a fraction. "You are very like your mother." "People say that when they are sad," Bly said. "I don't know what to do after." Dara inhaled carefully. "Neither do I." Reva did not require an apology. Dara paused in front of her on the meeting hall steps while Fen spoke quietly with Ven behind them. "You came back for a child not yours," Dara said. "I came back for a child who wrote me a letter." Dara looked at her for a long moment. "Are you staying?" "My work isn't done." Dara accepted the answer as far as she could. "Then see that it is done well." "I usually do." Bly watched the carriage take Dara down the road without waving until the last moment when she lifted 2 fingers. Dara, looking back through the small rear window, lifted gloved fingers in return. Fen stood on the porch of the meeting hall with his hat in his hands. The day had the worn-out quality of a storm that had passed without rain. Back at the mill, nobody celebrated. Celebration would have required choosing a shape for what had been saved, and they were all too tired for architecture. Fen made coffee, though the hour was wrong. Bly sat on the porch step with her field manual open and did not read. Reva leaned against the post, boots in the dust, bag at her feet. The mill wheel turned. A jay screamed from the oak as if objecting to legal procedure. Bly said, "I am glad I wrote the letter." "I gathered," Reva said. "Papa was not glad at first." Fen looked into his coffee. "Papa had stages." "You burned paper." "Bad use. Very bad." Reva looked at him. 3 letters?" "3. Were they any good?" "No." "Shame. I enjoy bad writing." "One asked you to come back because the court might count you." "That one deserved the stove." "Yes." "One said Bly missed you." Reva's hand tightened around her cup. "And the third?" Fen watched the yard where evening light lay across the sawdust. "The third was too honest to send." Bly, who had been raised among truth and therefore had terrible timing, said, "Was it about Reva's fugitive bag habits?" "Drink your cider," Fen said. "I am." "More quietly." Reva stared at the rim of her cup until the dangerous part of her face arranged itself into sarcasm. "For the record, my bag habits are veteran, not fugitive." Bly leaned against her knee. "You left biscuit crumbs in the loft. The mice advanced." "Then I must inspect the occupation." "You have to sleep there tonight?" Reva looked at Fen. He looked back, expression unreadable except for the part of it she could read too well. The house stood behind him with its lit windows and broken latch upstairs. The barn loft waited with mice, stovepipe, and 3 exits. "Tonight," she said, "the loft will do." Bly nodded, accepting the first brick without demanding the house. "I put your blanket back." "Back?" "I took it when you left because it smelled like cedar, and you and I was mad." "Did the blanket apologize?" "No, but I did not either, so we are even."
Fen closed his eyes briefly. Reva put her hand on Bly's head, an awkward, careful touch, and left it there until the child moved away first. The days after the hearing did not become simple. Reva distrusted simple almost as much as she distrusted gloves indoors. Dara's claim had been withdrawn, but traces of it remained. Letters to answer, neighbors pretending they had never speculated, Bly's sudden quiet whenever a carriage passed. Fen handled paperwork with Ven. Reva handled the mill because timber did not care about family court and would rot on schedule. Work saved them from having to speak too soon. She stayed. The fact developed in increments small enough to evade panic. First, she put the spare shirt back on the shelf because it needed air. Then the ledger.
Then the tool roll, because reaching into a packed bag every morning was inefficient, and Reva had standards. She bought a second pair of socks in town and placed them beside the first. She did not call this unpacking. She called it inventory access. Bly called it lying with shelves. Fen, wisely, said nothing. The too proud to ask problem remained, because one court hearing did not remake a life. Reva still found the spare nails by observing sawdust tracks. She still learned the butcher's credit rules by letting Mrs. Calder talk at someone else. She still asked Bly where Fen kept the roof tar, because asking an 8-year-old apparently did not count as surrender. "Why don't you ask Papa?" Bly said, leading her to the shed. "Because your Papa answers questions directly, and then a person has to live with the efficiency." "That is not a reason." "It has been working as one." Bly looked up at her with open suspicion. "You are odd." "I have references." The matter came to its small end on a hot afternoon with the chain housing over the saw table. A bolt had sheared inside the bracket. Old iron snapped flush where no grip could catch it. Reva knew 3 methods to remove it, all requiring either a tool she did not own or a second pair of hands at the exact angle. Fen had the better extractor. She had seen it once in the locked chest under the bench. She could wait until he opened it. She could ask Bly to retrieve it and pretend this was educational. She could rig a worse method and risk damaging the housing, which would be expensive and stupid and therefore familiar. She stood in the sawhouse, sweat running down her spine, staring at the bolt as if contempt might loosen it. Fen was outside loading boards. Bly was in the yard attempting to teach a beetle to choose between 2 sticks. The words were simple. She had said harder things in court. She had crossed land grants and hunger and men with red scarves. She could ask for a tool. Reva wiped her palm on her trousers and walked to the door. "Fen." He turned with a board still on his shoulder. "Yes, I need your help with this." He set the board down. No smile, no raised brow, no ceremony around the small, costly sentence. "Extractor? And your left hand. The angle is vile." "Coming." That was all. He came. He opened the chest, took out the extractor, stood close enough that his sleeve brushed her arm while she set the teeth and he held the bracket steady. Their hands worked in the same narrow space, scarred knuckles, green skin, sawdust sticking to sweat. The bolt gave with a sharp complaint. Reva exhaled through her nose. Fen took the broken piece from the extractor and dropped it into her palm. "Vile angle. Deeply. Good catch before it split the bracket." "Yes." He stepped back and reached for the replacement bolt. No comment on pride, no witness called. He helped because help had been asked, and help was the answer. The world did not end. The roof did not fall. No debt leapt from the shadows with rope in its teeth. Reva stood with the broken bolt in her hand and understood, with some irritation, that she had needed empirical proof. Fen handed her the new bolt. "Again?" "Yes," she said. Then, because the first ask had not killed her and recklessness sometimes followed survival, she added,
Show me the extractor chest key after supper. I'm tired of learning your locks by rumor. His eyes came to hers. The smile this time was small, but it stayed. All right. Don't look pleased. I'm looking efficient. You look unbearable. Bly says it runs in the household. It does, Reva said, and took the bolt. The latch was fixed before dawn 3 days later. Reva woke in the loft to gray light and the familiar pressure of a task that had waited long enough. She took the small brass catch from her own kit, the one saved from a wagon repair 2 settlements back, because good hardware should never be left to idiots. The house was quiet when she entered. Fen slept downstairs off the kitchen, his door half closed. Bly's room breathed soft under the eaves. Reva moved like someone approaching a skittish animal, though the animal was grief and had no body to startle. The old latch came away with 2 turns and 1 snapped screw she extracted with more patience than language. Bly slept through it, one arm flung over her head, hair escaped from its plaits, a book open on the blanket. On the sill, stones and feathers watched the procedure with official gravity. Reva cleaned the groove, set the new catch, aligned it twice, then a 3rd time because some repairs deserved exactness beyond utility. The window closed fully for the first time in years. The room changed by the width of a draft. Bly stirred. Reva? Sleep. Did you fix Mama's latch? Reva held still. Bly's eyes barely opened. It's okay. She didn't like drafts either. Then the child rolled over and returned to sleep with the merciless ease of the young. Reva stood by the window until the morning light sharpened. Downstairs a floorboard shifted, Fen waking. She gathered the old hardware and put it in her pocket, not as theft, not as relic, only because leaving broken pieces on a child's sill seemed poor practice. Then she went out to start coffee. Fen found the latch that afternoon. Reva knew because the house went quiet in the particular way houses did when a person stopped in a room and forgot the next motion. She was in the yard filing a chain tooth when he came out. He stood by the porch post for a moment. She did not look up immediately. Let him have the walk from room to yard. Let him decide what face to bring. You unpacked, he said. Not thank you, not why, not that was hers to fix, just the true thing under the visible one. Reva set the file across her knees. At some point, she was not entirely sure when, the bag in the loft had gone flat. Everything had come out. Shirts on the shelf, ledger under the window, tools hung from nails, socks folded with embarrassing optimism. Even the old oath-cut scar seemed less like a road away when her hand rested open on her knee. The barn loft has more light in the mornings than I expected, she said. It does. Mouse government remains unstable. Frontier problem. Bly is feeding insurgents. I'll speak to her. You will lose. I know. He stayed by the post. She sat on the low block with the chain between her boots. The latch hung between them, though neither named it. Repaired brass catching sun in a room behind them. A grief not erased, not solved, only allowed to close against weather. Fen's eyes were red at the edges. He did not hide it. Reva respected that enough not to look too long. After a while, he said, Roof chain housing needs checking before the next rain. I know. Need a second hand? She looked at him then. The old answer rose first. No, I have managed worse. No, I can climb alone. No, help is a polite word for future leverage. It rose, and she let it pass like bad weather over a roof that had finally been tarred. Yes, Fen nodded. After supper. Bly came out of the barn carrying a piece of chain she had absolutely been told not to touch. "This is not mill chain," she announced before anyone accused her. "It is historical chain." "History is heavy," Reva said. "I am strong historically." Fen took the chain from her hands. "You are dirty presently." Bly looked at Reva. "Are you staying for supper?" It was a small question, only if one had learned nothing from doors. Reva picked up the file again, drew it once along the tooth, and watched bright metal appear under the old dull edge. "Yes." "Tomorrow?" "Likely." "That means probably." "It means likely." "Next week?" Fen said, "Bly." Reva looked at the child, at the stubborn set of her mouth and the worry tucked badly behind it. Not cutesy,
Not manipulative. Only a child who had learned that adults could leave even when supper had gone well, and who deserved, as much as anyone could give, the dignity of a plain answer. Reva set the file down. "Next week," she said. Bly nodded once, accepting the boundary and the gift inside it. "Good. I need to show you my correction to the clay diagram." "I dread it already." "You should. It has arrows." Evening settled late over Aldric Mill. The creek carried gold under the wheel. Bly crouched in the yard with a stone in one hand and a beetle in the other, explaining options to both. Reva climbed the ladder to the sawhouse roof with the chain housing tools hooked through her belt, emerald skin bright against weathered boards, close-cut hair lifting in the wind. Fen stood below at the saw table, one hand shading his eyes, figuring the angle before he passed up the wrench she had asked for. 3 people arranged around the work, the mill running steady beneath them, the house behind them with its window closed against the coming night.